Okay, I think that's all the logistics. So with that being said, I will introduce our moderator for the remainder of this webinar. So Cruz Chan, who has moderated many of our webinars in the past, is the clinical manager for the Healing for Asians program at Richmond Area Multi-Services, RAMS for short, and they're also a trainer for the Lotus project. As a clinical manager, Cruz develops and manages the RAMS Healing for Asians program, which provides trauma-informed mental health services to limited English-speaking Asian victims of crime. Cruz is also a licensed marriage and family therapist and a registered drama therapist. So take it away, Cruz.
Thank you, Alan. Hello, everyone. My name is Cruz, and our first speaker of today is Shirley Law. Shirley is a program manager for the Culturally Specific Resource Center at the Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence. Shirley received a master's degree in international relations from NYU's Department of Politics and a bachelor degree in history and political science from UC Berkeley. She has been with API-GBV since late 2016, and through its work on the national and community level, she has become a strong believer in the power of partnerships in creating safer, equitable, and joyful communities. Please welcome Shirley.
Thank you, Cruz. Thank you, Ellen. And hi, everyone. It's great to see you all here today. Thank you for coming to learn about this topic. Give me a second while I share my screen and get organized here. But hi, so my name is Shirley Liu. I'm a program manager with the Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence. If you're not familiar with our work, I will introduce it briefly in a second. I myself am based in the Bay Area, California, and it's great to be here with you all today. So as you listen to the webinar, like Ellen described, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box if you're able to, or the chat box if you'd like. And also feel free to just if you have any reflections or comments or thoughts or anything like that, feel free to just drop those in the chat as well. I love when there's kind of a conversation going on in the chat, and a lot of you looking at your organization affiliations. It seems like a lot of you know a lot about the topic already, and I'm sure other participants would appreciate the opportunity to learn from each other as well. So let me just get right into it. Here, so like I said, I'm with API-GBV, and we are a national resource center. We are not a direct service provider, so we don't have direct services for survivors of violence. But what we do is advocacy, research, policy work. We do a lot of technical assistance and training. We have a lot of resources. You can see our website here. If you go on our website, you can find a ton of fact sheets and reports and data and things like that. Here's our lovely staff in last year in Atlanta. So here are our objectives for today. We will hopefully, after the webinar, you'll be able to describe some dynamics of domestic violence that are common in AAAI families or Asian American, Asian and immigrant families, to explain the effects of experiencing or witnessing domestic violence on the physical and or mental well-being of AAAI individuals, and to identify common challenges in serving domestic violence victims from this community. So I do, as you can tell, there's a little bit of a content warning in the presentation today. We're not going to be graphic. There's not going to be any graphic photos or anything like that, but some things we say may be triggering or activating. So just keep that in mind, and please take care of yourselves. I'm going to start off with some statistics. And I do want to stress, I think, like I said, many of you being familiar with domestic violence, this is preaching to the choir, but I do just want to set the context about what gender-based violence, including domestic violence, is and isn't. There's a lot of myths out there that domestic violence could be caused by stress, could be caused by anger or alcohol use, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, right? These are all things that can make the violence worse, make the violence more, the survivor's experience more complicated, could exacerbate the violence. But stress, alcohol, anger, drugs, these are not causes of violence, right? These are not the roots of domestic violence. At the roots of gender-based violence and at the roots of domestic violence is power and control, right? So one person or one group's belief that they should have power and they should have control over another person, the other person's body, the other person's choices, the resources that they have, their life, right? In a patriarchal system, which, many societies, including our US society privilege is something that's given to men at the expense of women, transgender, and gender nonconforming people. And so in our society, men tend to be the harm doers, are more often the harm doers, and women, transgender, and gender nonconforming people are more typically the people who are harmed in domestic violence. That doesn't mean that men cannot also be victims of domestic violence, and they often are. And face their own set of challenges, but women are disproportionately impacted. Domestic violence is something that is universal, meaning it exists in all communities, across all ages, socioeconomic statuses, all of that, religions, right? But somebody's experience might differ depending on their background. So all that aside, or not aside, but all that, kind of stated, here are some national prevalence rates. And I will talk later about kind of the gap in data and why we need more robust data. The data on this population is actually very limited and doesn't paint a full picture, but you can see here among AAPI women or Asian American and Pacific Islander women, just kind of a slightly different acronym, including Pacific Islanders, right? 7.2% experienced rape, 18% experienced sexual coercion, 44.2% experienced unwanted sexual contact, and 34.2% experienced sexual harassment in a public space during their lifetime. So those are very significant kind of, statistics. And I won't read all the statistics out, but hopefully these slides will be shared kind of afterwards as well. As you can see, the other statistics cover stalking and violence by an intimate partner or, a romantic partner, right? Domestic violence or dating violence. Here are some more statistics that relate to homicide. And from our studies, we can see that more than half of homicides of API women are related to intimate partner violence or domestic violence, intimate partner violence being another word for domestic violence. We do have more statistics on our website if you're interested in kind of learning more. Like I said, that the statistics that I shared, while significant, do not paint a full picture for a lot of reasons. One of the top reasons being that this population is among the least likely races and ethnicities to access services. So what that means is a lot of times the violence that they're experiencing, AAA people are experiencing, are not being seen, are not being captured in studies, right? AAAI people are among the least likely to go to preventative healthcare screenings, mental health services, to seek help with DVSA, domestic violence and sexual assault agencies, to go to shelter. They're among the least likely to respond to research studies and surveys. There's a lot of reasons for this. A lot of this has to do with stigma and shame and fearing what the community or their family might think. A lot of it has to do with believing that the services will not be accessible to them in their language, will not understand their culture, all of these things. And so, Excuse me. And so what that does is it invisibilizes the experiences of AAAI people. And so the statistics that you saw may be smaller. The prevalence rates might be smaller than in actuality. And just to set a little bit more context today, while we will be talking primarily about domestic violence, I do want to stress that domestic violence, like other forms of gender-based violence, do not exist in a vacuum. What that means is somebody who's experiencing domestic violence, they may have experienced other forms of violence in their lifetime. Sometimes they may currently be experiencing another form of violence, or they may have experienced it in the past. And all of someone's experiences of violence, what happened to them, what happened when they sought help for that violence, it can impact their current experience of domestic violence, right? You can't just put DV in a vacuum. You have to kind of situate it in all that somebody's experienced over the course of their life. And so this image kind of shows that, right? Shows the different forms of violence an AAPI person might have experienced over the course of their life. So in the next section, let me just make sure I'm not missing any questions or chat. We'll be talking a little bit about how domestic violence impacts children. And I'm talking specifically, more specifically about domestic violence in the household. So domestic violence between the parents often. Sometimes it could be other family members, but often it is the parents. Of course, children are also the direct targets of violence and gender violence. They can be targeted by violence, but I'm going to be talking more about children who are impacted by the violence between their parents or who witness violence between their parents. So in this community, physical violence between parents, between children, is normalized. Even if you think of something as innocuous, seeming as spanking, a lot of children from this population were spanked as in their youth. And while that might seem harmless, what it does is it normalizes violence, right? It makes physical violence seem like something that's common or something that just happens, something that's no big deal. A lot of children, as you saw in the statistics prior, also witness violence from their parents, between their parents to each other from a young age, and what that similarly, it makes them feel like violence is just normal, right? They can become numb to it. In AAAI communities, you may have seen that kind of trope of how Asian parents never say I love you. Instead, they ask you how you're doing in school, and they'll bring you a bowl of cut fruit. Food is how love is shown. They'll ask you, as you're going out the door, make sure you put on your jacket, things like that, right? So physical or love is not something that's outwardly shown or modeled. And that's something that can be confusing to young children, not understanding what love is or can look like. And so you can see on this this infographic here that how children can be impacted by violence. And this infographic is not culturally specific. It's not specifically about AAAI communities. It's more general, but it does give kind of a picture here. Right, children who are exposed to violence in the home are 15 times more likely to be physically or sexually assaulted than the national average. And part of that is because, like I shared, they're not able to kind of formulate the same understanding of healthy love and unhealthy love because they witnessed that violence in the home. Here are just some statistics that are specifically about AAAI, violence in the home and impacts on children. These studies are quite small, as you can see, and that's one of the gaps that I mentioned, right? We do need more robust studies on this population. But nevertheless, of 211 Japanese women in LA, 36% of first-generation respondents and 13% of others reported that their father had abused their mother in the household. In another study in Hawaii, 90% reported that their children had witnessed the violence, and 56% reported that children had attempted to intervene. In a study of 20 Asian survivors with children, half reported that children were present during some or many of the abusive incidents. So these are quite significant studies, right? When violence happens in the home, children are involved. Children are seeing the violence. Children are sometimes attempting to intervene from the violence, and that can have really far-reaching impacts on that child throughout the course of their life. Some other considerations about, kind of children and parenting is that the first one comes from both, within the community culturally, and also kind of the law enforcement system or the legal system, right? There's a double standard of parenting that exists. Women, the female partner, are often are held to a higher standard of parenting. And so they are more often blamed for the children experiencing or witnessing violence. You'll often hear somebody say that the survivor let their child be exposed to violence, or why did she not leave? She basically subjected her child to seeing violence by not leaving, right? These are things that are unfortunately common sentiments. Rather, we should be asking the question, well, why did he commit the violence in the first place, right? Survivors do frequently lose custody of their children due to bias, due to this kind of double standard, due to lack of language access or lack of immigration status. So often the child, because of, bias on the part of the custody evaluator or law enforcement or whoever it is that's responding to this case, the child is often put into the custody of either the abuser themselves or another family member who might be also doing harm, who might be condoning the harm, who might be part of, partly shaming the survivor, right? All of these things. The children are often also placed in a home where the foster parents or the caregivers don't speak their language, and there's no cultural match, and that often causes the child to not be able to heal from the trauma that they've experienced, or to kind of move on, right? Or to thrive. So I'm going over all these topics pretty quickly, but as I understand, you will have additional webinars in the future that kind of deeper dive into, impacts on children and other topics. Next, I will be talking about some systems barriers and other additional barriers for survivors and their children. Talking about historical or generational trauma, a lot of survivors, when we talk about historical and generational trauma, what we mean is trauma that a survivor's the community may have experienced, or their ancestors, their parents, their grandparents might have experienced, right? Even if they did not directly experience this violence or the trauma, historical violence is something that has rippling effects through the generations. When we think about how AAAI cultures are collective cultures, are storytellers, right? You learn from your parents and your grandparents. When that's not happening, when those cultural kind of norms of passing down learnings from your elders in your life is not happening, that can be deeply disruptive to somebody, an individual. It can be deeply disruptive to the children. And it creates, on the other hand, a cycle of violence, of silencing, of shaming, of blaming, that replaces that healing generational learning. And so historical violence is something that that cannot be ignored here when we're talking about domestic violence in this community. Historical violence, historical trauma is often takes these forms on the screen: colonization, historical oppression and forced assimilation, state violence and civil war, and displacement and refugee resettlement. And like I said, these are things that can create trauma through the generations. It can also create a fear and a distrust of those that are in a position of authority, including law enforcement, our legal system, our immigration system, our government, right? And that can all impact what a survivor does after they're experiencing violence. It can create fear and distrust of systems. And what I mean by systems is, like I said, our law enforcement system, medical, healthcare system, social services system, immigration system, right? The legal structures and institutions that we all have to navigate and a survivor has to navigate. Because of past negative experiences, survivors may not want to engage with the legal system or the healthcare system. Our systems additionally are extremely complex, right? So our immigration system is extremely complex. Our social security system, like think of all the forms that you have to kind of navigate, all the websites. And if you are somebody who is experiencing trauma, who may not speak English comfortably, who may be from a different country, that confusion, that intimidation can become magnified. AAAI survivors may also feel that their experience will not be understood, right? There's a lot of rhetoric that's been heightened due to COVID about kind of that kind of enhanced stereotypes of AAAI people. There's a lot of rise in Asian hate. There's all the cases that people see of, elders being assaulted in the streets or, women being harassed, right? So survivors may feel that their experiences will not be understood and that the caregiver, the person who's supposed to help them will not be helpful, right? That can contribute to not reporting. And a lot of survivors just don't know what help is. They don't know that there are DV shelters. They don't know what the DV shelter offers and doesn't offer. They don't know what will happen when they file a restraining order. They may not even know that a restraining order is a thing, right? So that's also a huge barrier for survivors. Lack of language access remains one of the biggest barriers, especially in this community. If you think about how, survivors, language is the vehicle to tell your story, to tell what happened to you. And if you're not able to do that, how will somebody be able to provide the best support for you? Oftentimes survivors are treated as abusers, so they're what's the word? I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but they're wrongly convicted or wrongly arrested for doing harm because they were not able to speak English to the law enforcement officer that appeared on the scene. The harm doer was able to speak English, and they told the cop that the survivor hit them first or something like that, right? That happens all the time, unfortunately. Or a survivor is often not able to say what happened to them and loses custody of their child because they weren't able to say, tell their story, tell the truth, right? Another huge barrier is for immigrant survivors, when there is a lot of anti-immigration rhetoric that comes from, the government or comes from wherever, right? Society. Immigrant survivors fear, being deported. They fear losing their children. And so what we've seen in our research is that immigrant survivors are more afraid of losing custody of their children and ICE, immigration enforcement, than they are of their abuser. So they'd rather stay in their abusive relationship than risk losing their immigration status. So here are some priorities for advocacy and partnership. I saw that a lot of you in the chat were already involved with the, domestic violence organizations. Some of you are with other community organizations. And some priorities, I think, just across the board are, first of all, disaggregated data. I've talked about this a lot already, but a lot of this population, the AAAI population or the AAPI population, is often treated as a monolith. It's often treated just as one block, one uniform block, right? And that's simply not true. There's a lot of diversity in this population. There's a lot of languages, over 100 languages, ethnicities, cultures, religions that are represented. And when you kind of lump the entire population into one like blob, right? The diverse experiences are not being seen and are not being met. A lot of times smaller communities, for instance, Southeast Asians or Pacific Islander communities, are not shown in studies because they're not statistically significant, meaning there's not enough of them to be able to be reported. And that further invisibilizes their experiences. And so surveys and studies need to be culturally and linguistically responsive. The survey, people who administer the survey need to know how to ask these questions that can be re-traumatizing, re-triggering. They need to be asking in different languages, right? Different forms, maybe not just written, maybe not just phone, right? There's a lot of places that we could go in terms of data. There's a lot of need, and data's kind of the first step, right? And in being able to respond to this community, we need to know what the issues are so that we can respond to them. Another priority is culturally specific agencies and culturally specific services, right? A lot of what's experienced by this population, as I understand your next speaker will talk about this more. A lot of what's experienced by this population is so unique because of the cultural norms, cultural dynamics, and cultural expectations that whoever's helping, whoever's responding needs to be able to understand and respond from a place of cultural humility and cultural awareness. And so culturally specific agencies are super, super important. They understand the norms. They understand what a survivor wants and needs. We have a resource on our website, API-GBV/org/directory will take you there, where you can find, it lists 160-ish culturally specific domestic violence and other gender-based violence organizations in the country. So feel free to kind of use that to look for an organization in your area that you could think about partnering with or getting involved in. Yes, if you have suggestions, Amy, of organizations, yeah, please reach out to me. Other organizations that can be included. Language access, like I talked about, is another priority. I don't want to spend too much time here because I am running a little low in my allotted time. And lastly, wraparound services. So, a survivor of domestic violence, they may need support for, the violence that they experience, maybe medical care, maybe being in a support group. But there's also, DV not existing in a vacuum, right? There's also so many things that they may need that would help them in their healing journey, that would help them feel safe or feel like they're able to leave their relationship or just get to a better place of safety. That don't directly have to do with violence, right? For instance, interpretation. They may need mental health services. They may need job training to be able to kind of live independently. They may need transportation, just getting to the courthouse for their case. Maybe they're not able to do that because their abuser never let them drive, right? These are all things big and small that can make a huge difference in the life of a survivor. And these are all only some of the services that organizations in that directory offer. And so wraparound services, what I mean by that is kind of services that touch upon any needs that a survivor might have, again, from big to small. And before I pass it back to Cruz to introduce the next speaker, here are just some resources. And I realize that they're not clickable, but we can share them in the slides after the presentation. Okay.
Thank you, Shirley, for your informative presentation. Now we have 10 minutes of Q&A. So I encourage audience, if you have any questions related to Shirley's presentation, please feel free to type your question in the function of Q&A who is in the bottom of your screen. That now we have 3 questions ready for Shirley. But before we ask the question, I also want to mention some appreciating message towards you, Shirley, when you were presenting. Adriana mentioned about thank you for mentioning the diversity in the population versus one race or ethnicity. It's very important that we being more diverse. And another participant also appreciates that having access to the slide shown here, and it's also very informative. So when people continue to ask questions in the Q&A, there are 3 questions already here that we want to ask Shirley. One participant asked, what is dowry-related deaths?
So I'm not the expert on this particular topic, but dowry-related deaths have to do with when a pair gets married. There's often the tradition where the family of one person, one of the couple has to give a dowry to the family of the other or to the other person themselves. And a lot of times there's just different traditions related to that where one partner might feel like they want to kill, basically. I was trying to think of a way to say it in a better way, but one partner might kill the other in order to get that dowry. For instance, in that tradition, in that culture, if they divorce, maybe the dowry has to go back to the family, but if the spouse dies, their surviving partner might be able to keep the dowry. There's just different traditions, and it depends on the culture. But it's basically, I guess, to put it simply, one partner, one spouse killing the other in order to get access to their dowry.
Thank you. There is another question for you. How can we continue to help those in the minority communities with the upcoming possibility of mass deportation? This will not only hurt the Asian communities, but also the Latinx communities as well. And this participant mentioned about their fear that they will be becoming more untrusting of any resources that are here to help them. For this, do you have any suggestion or any things that you want to share?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something that's come up in the past. As we go through kind of different administrations and just different sentiments about immigrants and different changes in policies that impact immigrants. We've seen it happen in the past where survivors, like I said, are just very scared, and rightly so, of being deported, not just from the Asian community, but also other communities as well. I think it's really important for those who are, excuse me, those who are in a position to help, to have the right information, the updated information about the rights of immigrants and when deportation becomes an option and when it isn't. Meaning a lot of times the fear, not to say that the fear is unfounded, but a lot of times communities don't understand their rights as well. And so for those who are like service providers, kind of being educated about what resources are available to immigrants, what protections are available, is really helpful in supporting that community. There's a lot of protections for survivors in the immigration system. U visas, for instance, or T visas are ones that can protect immigrant survivers and their families. And I know there's a lot of issues surrounding those too, like long wait times and things like that. We actually have, I don't know if I'm allowed to share, but we actually have an upcoming webinar about kind of some recent updates to immigration and safety planning for immigrants that I can share if it would be helpful.
Yeah, and maybe you can put it in the chat or like
Yeah.
mhm. When you are doing this, I'm going to ask another question.
Sure. Yeah.
So there's a participant asking like, is marital rape starting to be recognized in some of the AAPI community? This is a very specific kind of like abuse.
I think it depends. I think the trend is that it's being recognized more and more, but unfortunately there's still a lot of communities and individuals that don't recognize it, that believe that once you're married there you can't be raped, or it's kind of like a blank check to do whatever, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
and I think for that usually it's like happening in the private situation as well. Like it's
Yeah.
really hard to just like mention or like share what actually happened at that time. And yeah, this is hard. And I think for the next presentation, we'll talk a little bit about this as well. So there are two more questions. One is with the system and language barriers along with the cultural social norms. How are data collected if survivors and victims are not open to reaching out? So how are we going to collect those data?
And that's a tough one. I mean, unfortunately, you can't really force a survivor to, to share their experience if they're not comfortable doing so. There's a lot of ways that researchers kind of get at try to get at the prevalence rates indirectly. A lot of it has to do with how much people are accessing services. How many people are coming to shelters, how many AAPI people are coming to shelters or coming to healthcare providers, and the healthcare provider sees that they have experienced violence. So kind of the proxy ways of doing that. So I mean, that's not a great answer, but like I said, unfortunately, you can't kind of force people to open up. I think the more important thing is for whoever's doing the research to be well educated and well informed about kind of the social norms and shame that survivors experience and be able to navigate that, and encourage them to share their experience, more wholly. I think what happens a lot of times is researchers might say like, are you experiencing domestic violence? And a lot of people are not going to say yes, right? They're not going to want to share with, the stranger. They may not even consider themselves to be experiencing domestic violence. So I think a lot of education kind of needs to happen with the research, whoever's doing the research as well.
For the last but not least question for you, Shirley, asking in your work in domestic violence, have you come across any training designed towards the abuser to educate them on their impact to their family and how they can do better? This is different from anger management classes on like prevention and early intervention, like etc.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the movement focuses on response to survivors because that's kind of the most pressing, the urgency. But there's a lot of work being done by those community organizations around early prevention. A lot of it has to do with kind of parenting, parenting, healthy relationships classes. I believe that your next speaker may be able to answer this question better because Narika has a parenting. I'll let her talk about it, but I think they have a parenting program. So a lot of the work there is kind of, teaching parents how they can uh, have a healthy relationship between themselves and also parent their children in a healthy way. Um, that I think has been doing a lot of good in the community.
Thank you, Shirley, and thank you for your smooth transitioning to our next presentation as well. This is
You're
really
welcome.
exciting. Thank you, Shirley. Thanks again. So now we are going to have another presentation for this webinar. But if audience, you have any other question for Shirley, feel free to keep asking your questions in the Q&A chat, and then Shirley will be answering in her free time. So our next presentation is from Narika. We have two presenters from Narika today. Prajakta Telang is a law graduate from Mumbai University, India, and has worked in the family law sector in India as well. She did her paralegal certification and advanced paralegal certification from UCSC. She has been associate with Narika since last year and recently joined the Narika team as a community liaison advocate. And our co-speaker from Narika is Jessia Min, who is the housing manager with Narika. She has over 9 years of experience working directly with domestic violence survivors, providing crisis and case management services. She found her passion for survivor advocacy during her undergrad years in Santa Cruz, where she got involved at the local women's shelter. Jessia manages Narika's transitional housing program and their culturally responsive emergency shelter program. Please join me. Welcome both.
Thank you. So firstly, thank you, Ellen and the Lotus Project for giving us this wonderful opportunity. I thank you, Cruz, for this lovely introduction of me and Jasia. And thank you for the wonderful audience to be present here. And also, I would like to tell that Shirley, that was a great presentation with really insightful data. Thank you for that. Also, I always say this wherever I go, that this is a collective movement, and more support we get from the community as such, it's always beneficial for the movement and the survivors as well. So having said that, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Prajakta Telang, and I'm the community liaison advocate with Narika. I'm hereby joined by our housing manager, Jasia Mim, and she is my co-presenter for today. Before I start sharing the slides, I would like to tell that if anyone has any questions during the time I'm presenting, please feel free to type it in the chat window. Jasia is here to take care of them. So without wasting much time, I'll just start to share my screen with you all. I hope everything is looking good. Okay. So today I'm here to present how domestic violence prevails in the South Asian community and how it impacts the children in the community and its youth. But first, I would like to introduce Narika for you all. Narika is a non-profit organization founded in 1992 by a group of South Asian women, and we serve the survivors of domestic violence and abuse. Though we are based in Fremont, we serve the survivors from all the Bay Area counties. I'm very sure most of you are aware of this concept, but it is my duty to go over it again. So before we go in the depth of the topic, it is important to know what exactly domestic violence is. Domestic violence is a pattern of abusive behavior in any relationship that is used by one partner to gain control or maintain power over the other intimate partner. I would later go a little bit more in depth about this topic as we proceed further. So, today we are going to cover whom we exactly serve, what are the additional complexities for South Asian families and the immigrant survivors. Also, we would be telling you all what Narika programs are and what are the services we offer. Let's start with whom we serve. We serve all survivors of intimate partner violence. Now, I would like to pause here a bit and shed some light on exactly what IPV is and how it is different from domestic violence. So, IPV is violence or abuse which takes place between romantic partners. They may or they may not live in the same household. For example, the spouse, boyfriend, living in partner, even the ex-boyfriend, etc. Whereas domestic violence takes place within a household and can be between any two people within that household. For example, spouse, which would again be IPV, then parents, children, siblings, etc. We serve all genders and adults above 18 years of age. We primarily serve the San Francisco Bay Area, including Alameda, Contra Costa, Santa Clara, and other Bay Area counties. We are language competent. In 2024, we have served over 900 clients through various programs. This is an eye-opening fact which states that nearly 40% of surveyed South Asian women experience some form of intimate partner violence. This survey was conducted by the University of Wyoming and University of California. Moving ahead, let's see which countries exactly are covered when we say South Asia. It's Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal. We have Bhutan, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and Sri Lanka. Having said that, we offer our services to everyone, anyone outside the South Asian community as well. Let's move on to see what are certain patterns or trends that we commonly observe in this community. The biggest problem we face is that the survivors do not report about the abuse and even sometimes reconcile after filing for a restraining order or divorce. And there might be many reasons for this. Some of it would be as listed here. They fear that the partner would lose their job. There is still a hope in them that the partner would change their attitude and behavior. And there is a lot of family pressure. Needless to say that. Many times we have observed that the abuser files a restraining order or a police report even before the survivor does. In literal words, the abuser turns the table around and puts the survivor in a fix. Then we have transnational abandonment cases or the spousal abandonment, where one spouse is left overseas by the other spouse. It is a form of domestic abuse and it involves controlling and coercion. Then there are some common patterns which we observe, like recording devices and cameras are put in the house. There are GPS trackers in the car. There are other forms of tech abuse which take place. Also, in many South Asian families, there is a lot of interference from the extended family. I would be talking about this in the later slide. The abusers move money from one country to their home country. And when they do that, their intention is basically to put the survivor in great financial problem. Some abusers move to their home country or other states within the USA and continue to work from there. And they do this intentionally so that the survivor can't reach out to them, can't find their address, they're unable to serve papers. And also, they're not eligible to actually pay for any support for the survivor or the child. This is something which was discussed earlier as well, and that is that many survivors are not aware that sexual abuse in marriage is still abuse. Survivors in especially South Asian communities think that it is their duty to oblige in sexual activities because their husband has said so. They are totally unaware that even if it is against their wish, it is sexual abuse.
I wanted to, Prajakta, if I may, go to the
Sure.
previous slide, and I wanted to expand on, can you go to the previous slide, Prajakta? I wanted to expand a little bit on the around transnational abandonment and talk a little bit more about visa issues that that many of the South Asian survivors we serve face. Particularly because we are living in the Silicon Valley. Many folks from the South Asian community are here on work visas, as an example, where the spouse is on they're the primary holder of the visa, and the survivor is on a dependent visa. And oftentimes, if they're on the dependent visa, they actually are unable to work because they don't have a work permit. So while in most situations that we see where most domestic violence situations, there often is a fear of reporting, a fear of a partner going to jail. But particularly, I want to emphasize that because of this dependency, there is financial, economic dependency, and if their partner, goes to jail, gets arrested, there is a big fear that then the survivors and their children may become homeless. And there's often lots of threats around, if you speak up for yourself, if you try to take steps, then I will make you lose your status. And so if this it becomes a really big issue when immigrant survivors have U.S.-born children, because then there's also a fear of deportation, where the survivor is afraid that they may be separated permanently from their children.
Thank you, Jasia, for adding that up.
Thank you.
So yes, moving ahead, we have observed that there are many barriers that prevent the survivors from reporting abuse. These are some of them which have been enlisted below. I would be going through each one of them in detail later. So we have immigration, there are cultural and societal norms, stigma or social isolation, lack of awareness, there is economic dependence, language barriers, transportation, fear of homelessness, and mistrust in authority figures. Let's see how immigration acts as a barrier. Many survivors come here as dependent, as Chasi had just mentioned, on the abuser. And they fear that if they separate from the spouse, they will lose their visa or they even might get deported. Now, survivor is attached to the partner by immigration status, and dependent visa is used as a further weapon to victimize the victim. Now, additional problem arises if the children are born in the US, because then the survivor on the dependent visa would have to go back home alone without their children. Survivors are often reluctant to separate because, as I earlier mentioned, they fear deportation for themselves and their children. Many a times, women are also not aware of their correct immigration status, and often the abuser even lies about it. For example, they may have a EAD, they are even eligible to work, but they are not conveyed so. They have been told that, no, you don't have an EAD, you still don't need to work here. The financial independence is actually withdrawn there. Many of them do not also have access to immigration paperwork. They don't know what is going on in their life. They don't know who the attorney is who's handling their case. And as Chasia mentioned, many a times partners also threaten the survivors to send them back home. They also tell that, just listen to us, otherwise we are not going to renew your dependent visa. Moving ahead, let's see how cultural and societal norms also act as barriers. So we have friends and family, usually tell that this is a very normal thing which takes place in the house. You don't have to, blow it out of proportion. And there are collectivist attitudes which minimize abuse and prioritize family stability. They don't care for the individual's suffering. there is a lot of survivor shaming in many households. By that, I mean is that the survivor is directly blamed for the abuse. I mean, just imagine the survivor is going through a lot of abuse, and again, on top of that, the survivor has to hear that survivor is responsible for that. There are many ways that can happen. Like one of the examples we have mentioned on the slide is, telling the survivor, if only you would have treated him with better food, or you only must have instigated the abuser. On those lines, in short, the survivor is blamed for the survivor's current state. The survivors are also unwilling to consider being homeless or deported. In many South Asian families, we have observed that the women are taught to tolerate. Since birth, they have seen their mothers, their grandmothers succumbing to the abuse. So they think that's the way to live. They have seen and they have grown up in that situation. So women are taught often to tolerate abuse so that to avoid conflict, give priority to their children, their family, everyone, but not themselves. There is a lot of stigma and social isolation associated, and that acts as a barrier again. By stigma, I mean a taboo. Like survivors think that being a divorcee or walking out of an abusive marriage would be a taboo for them in the society. It is a social stigma, and they would be looked down upon, misjudged, and isolated. There is a lot of lack of awareness and understanding about their own mental health. And many of our clients also fear being ostracized by their own family members. So, fear of losing face in the community or being thrown out of the social cycles really kills them. Cultural pressure is there to stay in marriage. So, we had a very young client who didn't want to file for divorce despite of a lot of domestic abuse going on with her. But she was fine with filing for legal separation, and we tried to convince her a lot, uh, to make up her mind. But she put her foot down, and the thing she said was, I can't get a divorce because my culture doesn't permit me staying away from my husband. So this happens in our, South Asian communities a lot. Also, there is inability of the survivors to go back to their home country because of the disrupted family relationships. It might be the abuser's family or sadly their own family. So this is a very sad state to be in actually when the survivor's own family treats the survivor in a very disrespectful way. I also remember a client coming back and telling us one day that I don't know whether I should feel more bad about the domestic abuse which is, done by my partner or my own parents who are not wanting me back in the house. It was a very sorry state. I mean, we were also very sorry for that. In my previous slide, I had mentioned about extended abuse here where I would be dealing with it a little bit in detail. So extended abuse is when domestic abuse extends to the in-laws or extended relatives. In most of the South Asian community families, there is a perception that the woman marries into the family and becomes more part of them. Then it's the other way around. Family abuse is just like a part and parcel of a marriage. It's like you have to just unsee what is happening and lead your life. Also, respect for elders prevents these young survivors from reaching out for help. Now, submission is often equated, honestly, it is misunderstood as respect. Now, there is lack of awareness. This is a big problem we are facing these days. So, one more thing I would like to highlight is, it's not only uneducated survivors who face this, but it is not uncommon that even an educated survivor lacks awareness about really basic things. Like they're unaware of what 911 is, what their local resources are, where to go to look out for help. They fear consequences because they don't know what to expect when they call 911. They don't know whom to reach out. They even are scared to talk to their own doctors about it. Also, they're afraid that their partners would lose their immigration status and they would land into trouble because of that. This happens mostly because they have no support of family or friends here. One more reason is they are unaware of the mandated reporters. Now, mandated reporters are people who are required to report suspected abuse and neglect. For example, doctors, counselors, teachers, and social workers. They are also unaware of the medical insurance status they have. One of the other main things we have observed which lands as a barrier is the unemployment. So, as most of the survivors are unemployed, most of them don't even have a work permit. They are totally dependent on the abusive partner. In many cases where the visa status is eligible for EAD, survivors are misinformed by their partners regarding their eligibility, as I earlier mentioned. And even if the survivor has an EAD, the partner threatens to take it away. For many that are employed, this is a real sorry state, I must say, that the paychecks usually directly goes in the partner's account. And this leads many a times to victimization, control, and financial abuse. Language barriers and education also play a very important role. Many South Asian survivor women can't converse in English. Some do understand, but they can't speak. And exactly this happens, and many times when a person is causing harm, has the survivor sign documents and lie about what she's signing, and they take the advantage of this situation of the survivor. Also, many survivors who have great careers back home, they can't pursue the same career here because their degrees are not accredited here. They are unable to find well-paying jobs due to the language access. Even they are not able to find any help for them, approach legal services, take any information about domestic violence because it's not available in their own native language. Let's move on to see what impact all of this domestic violence has on children. The brunt of domestic abuse or IPV is not only faced by the survivor, but the children involved in the marriage are also the most affected. To take the pressure of the conflicts going on at a young age is definitely not easy. And it's not good for their overall well-being. The impact of domestic violence on children can be seen in the following ways. Many children complain of sleep and eating disruptions. There is withdrawal and lack of responsiveness. Intense and pronounced separation anxiety is found. Many children resort to inconsolable crying, and the parents can't figure out why the child is crying. There is developmental regression and loss of acquired skills, which we can see even at a later age. There is intense anxiety, there are worries they're crippled with, and there are new fears they keep on developing. Basically, there is a lot of insecurity because of the TV which is going on in the house. There is increased aggression and impulsive behavior. There are nightmares, and there is aggression and difficulty with peer relationships in school. There are many fights actually these children usually tend to pick up in school. They don't understand at that point of time what is the reason, but what goes back home actually just reflects in their behavior in the outer world. So there is avoidance of school, which results in truancy. They have school failure grades. Then they have withdrawal or emotional numbness. It's very difficult for them to concentrate, and focus at one point of time. There is reckless and impulsive behavior. Now, in some older kids, in youth especially, we observe that there is a lot of substance abuse. They just want to hide and get away with whatever is going on in the house, and they resort to this. Also, there are many kids who want to or actually run away from the household to get away from the problems in the house. Same kids, when they grow up, they are involved in violent and abusive behavior with their own partners. There is a lot of depression, anxiety, withdrawal, and antisocial behavior, which is seen in these kids. Let's also just see what impact children is there on children, specifically in the South Asian community. Now, in South Asian community, what happens is most of the extended family is back in their home country, and the kids here are usually at the mercy of their parents. So lack of extended family in this country actually isolates them. They don't have this kind of support they would actually need to have. There is also a lot of stigma around mental health in our community, and that's why it prevents the children from getting help. Children also are very confused to get the right kind of guidance. And the reason is because the parents are confused in between two cultures, the cultures they grew up in and the culture they're actually witnessing here. So, in short, there's a lot of confusion going on everywhere. Children are told not to talk about the incidents at home because there is a fear of getting mandatorily reported. In many families, children disconnect from the parents once they leave home and go to the college. Children are caught between parents, especially when the abuser indulges to, give children expensive gifts or they promise to pay college fees. Now let's move on to see what Narika services are and what do we offer. We have a helpline which operates Monday to Friday from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. We have a very effective case management plan, and it includes a safety plan. We connect the survivors to the public benefits. We have TRO and dissolution paperwork done in-house. We have legal consultation by our in-house family lawyers. We do court accompaniments for our survivors. There are therapy referrals by culturally responsive therapists who speak South Asian languages. We have a great program called HEAL. It is a virtual support group. We have psychoeducation support group as well. There is a Saheli Circle, which is an in-person support group in Fremont. The Titli Circle, where the survivors assemble, they talk to each other, they do some art and craft. It's a time they actually rejuvenate. Then we have quarterly culturally responsive client get-togethers. We have wellness groups for the survivors where they dance, there is mindfulness. We also, motivate them and we ask them to journal their thoughts and feelings. It's a good way for them to unwind themselves. We also conduct legal workshops. They are known as the Know Your Rights Clinic, and it is open for the community and survivors together. We cover topics like family law, immigration, survivor housing, etc. We have the SEED program, which is a financial wellness program for the survivors. We have individual sessions with the clients for budgeting, resume building, etc. We have a great housing program, a new transitional house we have, which houses 5 families. We offer emergency safe nights for up to 3 months. We help clients develop plan to obtain housing and help clients to apply for low income housing as well. We have quarterly food drives taking place. In short, Narika addresses the unmet needs of survivors of abuse by providing advocacy, support, information, and referrals within a culturally sensitive and linguistically diverse model. Thank you. This is our information. Anyone who wants to reach out to us, we would be great. Any questions? I mean, Jasi and I would be more than happy to answer them.
Yeah, I see some questions just coming in the Q&A, so I'll go ahead and just take some of them. So does Narika have a meaning? I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Prajakta, Nari in Hindi means woman, and so
Yes.
Narika means for women.
Yes, that's correct.
Mm-hmm. So how often do you have clients who are survivors of DV and or IPV in interracial relationships? So Narcos serves any survivor who calls our helpline. So we have served folks who are non-South Asian. I don't know the percentage off of the top of my head, but I want to say that at least I want to say over 70% of the folks who are calling us are South Asian. For South Asia, for immigrants who have like migrated to the U.S., typically they're in a relationship with a person from usually a similar country. Now, we also serve second, third generation folks. So oftentimes we're seeing more interracial relationships in the second and third generations. What can we do on a daily basis to encourage victims not to feel guilty and self-blame? So I really love this question because I think a big part of helping survivors break cycles of abuse is providing ongoing support, encouragement. Oftentimes, I think in every domestic violence relationship I've seen, there is a form of emotional and psychological abuse. Often there is gaslighting. So, like really providing encouragement, telling survivors to not give up. I would also say, like, maybe if you have someone that you're trying to give support around, providing support even around the little things, helping someone with transportation, like a ride to somewhere, helping them, helping watch their kids while they attend like therapy or go to a support group. Those things can be really helpful. Prajakta, do you want to add anything around how to support survivors to not feel guilty and self-blame?
Uh, I think a lot of thing is to do with how we uplift them and how, as a community, we support them together, and also not to victimize them or feel that they are victimized. We have to uplift their spirit. That is very important, and that's what exactly Narika does.
Mhm. And I would like to also add language. So like the language can be like really important. So uh if you see like a survivor maybe putting themselves down, like talking to them in like an uplifting manner, like Prajakta was saying, can be really helpful. And I think the fact that like the willingness to have conversations, because also I think there is a lot of like isolation, there is a lot of self-blame. So repeatedly checking in on someone, even maybe when they're not reaching out, that can also be a sign that that they might need a little bit more support during this time. Let's see.
An audience asked about safety plan.
Yes. Narika ourselves, I don't think we have like at this time, we don't have like a safety plan that we've created ourselves. But I do think that so if you're looking for like a online resource or like an actual written out safety plan, you can definitely Google search that. One thing I also want to say is so we don't have like a resource that we're currently advertising, but our helpline is a really great resource for safety planning, whether that's for the survivors themselves or they're a support person. We do have oftentimes like friends, family who call in to try to get support for a survivor, and we can provide maybe some safety planning to the support person. And I will also add that usually we will encourage the survivor to call directly, because generally that's working with them one-on-one is how we understand like their safety issues, how to communicate with them, and we can kind of take it more in depth from there. So
One more question. Yes.
Yeah, so this question says, how does the caste system further exacerbate DV experiences for South Asian women, if it does? This is an excellent question, and I want to start by saying that I don't think I have the full expertise to answer this question, but essentially, you know, uh, for like we know that when folks are marginalized, when they experience forms of oppression, it becomes harder to access resources, to get support. Um, uh, you know, you, like as an example, you know, most of the cases that we serve, there is high amounts of like financial abuse. So if someone is, as an example, experiencing, financial abuse, and they're also experiencing other forms of oppression, that kind of uh, prevents them from being able to leave that relationship, I absolutely think it does. Prajakta, I don't know if you have anything specific you want to add to this point.
I was trying to look for the question here. Can you just repeat? Because I missed out on the word what specifically was asked. I was trying to scroll through the number of questions. So
Oh,
I would appreciate if the question is repeated.
yeah, it's if you go to the bottom bar, it's next to the share screen, there's a Q&A tab. You got to click that.
Oh, no, no. I'm talking about there are so many questions in the Q&A that I just lost the thread where
Oh,
this exactly the question was.
okay. Let me just reread it. How does the caste system further exacerbate DV experiences for South Asian women?
Caste system.
Yes.
Okay. I would like to shed a bit light on this. So like I'm from India, as the Cruz had introduced in the introduction itself. So caste system is a lot of prevalent in our community and our society. So having said that, I think it is time for us to keep castes aside and just look in a bigger picture that it is a misconception usually that, a particular person from a particular caste would suffer more domestic violence. Actually, it is about the mentality of the person. So if the person, even if comes from a higher caste, lower caste, educated, uneducated, it doesn't matter if your mentality is not straight. If you want to abuse, you are going to abuse. I mean, honestly, it's a myth. Many a times we feel that a person from a lower caste would be more abusive, but many a times broken families take place in, higher caste people as well. So this specifically, I can talk about India in the South Asian community because I have worked a lot there, and this is what I have figured. Definitely, caste system prevails. There are definitely ifs and buts also, but at the same time, there are certain things which are beyond caste, I would feel, and I would say that in USA, there is more than caste. It is just about the mentality. Going back in from where I come, it is little different. So yeah, so I would like to focus and say that it is more to do how your mentality is and how you are brought up, more than the caste or how rich you are, and all these things come secondary.
Mhm.
Thank you. And before we end our webinar, there are one more questions for you. In your work in domestic violence, have you come across any training designed towards the abuser to educate them on their impacts to their family and how they can do better? This is different, like from anger management classes, more on like prevention and early intervention aspect. So this one actually is for question for the previous presentation as well, but they want to ask you as well.
Mhm. Yeah. So this I think is where like myself as an advocate, I would love to see more work being done. I so I work in the space of working directly with the survivors. And many times survivors are coming to us and saying, can you provide help to my partner? In my role, we are in the role of a domestic violence advocate. I don't think like we can work with both people. But in my experience, I don't think there is enough being done. As an example, many times people who are committing domestic violence are being if they are attending if they're being required to attend a program, it is anger management, except anger management is different than domestic violence. Um, so there needs to be more done. But one thing I wanted to touch on, and this kind of goes to our prevention program in terms of what Narika is trying to do. So, you know, I think one of the things that we see in South Asian and immigrant communities is there is a lot of challenges not only between the partners but also the children who are growing up in the home, where if there's domestic violence in the home, it's also really challenging to have healthy relationships with the children and for children to have healthy relationship with others. So we decided to kind of create a prevention program that was designed to support South Asian parents. And so we've offered this program as a community. So it's not just specific to survivors. It's for anyone who's trying to get support around being a healthier parent. And some of the things that we talk about is having compassion for yourself as a parent because if you are, if there has been unhealthy things going on, it's like there needs to be a way to acknowledge it, a way to process that with your child. So we actually created kind of a prevention program that was designed with a therapist to provide tools and resources for parents to have healthier relationships with their children as a way to kind of reduce like family and domestic violence.
Thank you both, Jessia and Prajakta, for your presentation, and also Shirley for your presentation before as well. I have to pass the time to Ellen, but there's one more question in the chat. Do you mind
I can
spending
type in the
time
chat,
to type?
please.
Thank you. Ellen, take the time.
Thank you, Cruz. Yeah, just wrapping up the webinar, we wanted to thank everyone for taking the time to be here today and learn with us and from the speakers. Thank you so much to the speakers for taking the time to share your expertise with us and also your experiences supporting AAAI domestic violence survivors, both on the community level and also at the policy level as well. And thank you, Cruz, for moderating and facilitating our transitions today. And if audience, if you all have any other questions, feel free to email the speakers, email us. We will be also sharing their emails on the website after this. And please fill out the evaluation form to let us know how to improve our webinars for the future and give us feedback. And again, about the CE credits, if you weren't able to mark that you needed them in the registration, please email us. Our email is lotusproject@phi.org, and we can get the certificate to you. And in the following week or two, we will be sending out the recording for this webinar, as well as the speaker slides and contact information, and the link to the evaluation form again. So thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day and your week.